My name is Mark. I was born and raised in a small town in Ohio, where the seasons changed predictably and everyone knew their neighbor's business, or thought they did. After college, I stayed put and opened my own furniture restoration workshop. It wasn't glamorous work, but it was mine. There's something deeply satisfying about taking a piece of broken, forgotten furniture and breathing new life into it. People would bring me their grandmother's rocking chair or a water-damaged antique dresser, and I'd transform it into something beautiful again. The work kept me grounded, kept me sane. My wife's name was Linda. She worked at the local library, a job that suited her perfectly. She'd always been the quiet, bookish type. We'd been together for over 15 years, married for 12 of them. We were high school sweethearts who somehow made it work through college and into real adult life. I never doubted our family, even though we'd struggled with infertility for years. The doctors couldn't find anything definitively wrong with either of us, but children just never came. Linda took it harder than I did, but I thought we'd weathered that storm together. After all, we had each other and that felt like enough. The first sign something was wrong wasn't dramatic. It wasn't lipstick on a collar or mysterious phone calls at midnight. Linda barely changed anything about her routine, which is probably why it took me so long to notice. But one evening in late September, I came home early from the workshop to find her on the kitchen phone, speaking in a voice I hadn't heard in years. It was warm, intimate, alive with an energy that used to be reserved for me. When she saw me, she quickly ended the call, saying it was just her sister checking in about their mother's birthday. I wanted to believe her. God knows I tried. But something in the way she avoided my eyes, the slight flush in her cheeks, the way she suddenly became very busy cleaning dishes that were already clean, it all felt wrong. That night, I lay awake listening to her breathe beside me, wondering if I was losing my mind. Maybe the stress of the business was getting to me. Maybe I was reading too much into innocent conversations. Maybe 15 years of marriage had made me paranoid about losing what I had. But then the small lies began to accumulate. A week later, I came home to find Linda loading a box into her car. When I asked about it, she said they were old books for the library's donation drive. Reasonable enough, except the library had just finished their annual book drive the month before. Linda had spent weeks organizing it, complaining about the workload. When I mentioned this, she got defensive, snapping that they were running a smaller, informal drive that I wouldn't understand because I didn't work there. The Linda I knew didn't snap. She might get quietly frustrated or withdraw when upset, but she didn't lash out. This version of my wife felt like a stranger wearing Linda's face. 2 weeks after that, a man named Eric walked into my workshop. He was probably in his early 40s, well-dressed in that casual expensive way that suggested he worked in tech or finance. He wanted to restore an antique mahogany chest of drawers that had belonged to his grandmother. As we talked about the work, I noticed he kept checking his phone, smiling at messages in a way that seemed almost familiar. "Sorry," he said, catching me watching. "My girlfriend's been texting me all day. We're planning a weekend getaway." Something cold settled in my stomach. I managed to discuss the restoration project professionally, quoted him a price, scheduled a timeline. But all the while, I was studying his face, his mannerisms, trying to place why he seemed significant. That evening, Linda mentioned casually that she might start working some weekend shifts at the library. "Budget cuts," she explained. "They're offering overtime pay for expanded Saturday hours." I knew she was lying. The library had actually increased their budget that year. Linda had been excited about it for months, talking about new programs they could finally afford to implement. The pieces were forming a picture I didn't want to see. I began paying attention in ways I'd never had to before. I noticed that Linda's phone was always face down now, that she'd started taking it with her even when she went to the bathroom. I noticed she'd bought new underwear, nothing scandalous, just newer, prettier than what she usually wore. I noticed she'd started wearing a perfume I'd never smelled before, something light and floral that definitely wasn't the vanilla scent she'd worn for years. Most tellingly, I noticed that she'd become more affectionate with me in calculated ways. Quick kisses when leaving for work, compliments about my cooking, interest in my day that felt performed rather than genuine. It was the kind of behavior people exhibited when they felt guilty about something. One evening in October, Linda announced she was going to visit her college roommate Sarah, who lived about an hour away. Sarah was going through a divorce, Linda explained, and needed emotional support. She'd probably stay the night rather than drive back late. I'd met Sarah exactly twice in 15 years. They exchanged Christmas cards and the occasional Facebook like, but they weren't close. More importantly, Sarah had moved to California 2 years earlier, a fact Linda had mentioned when complaining about losing touch with old friends. After Linda left that evening, I did something I'd never done in our marriage. I violated her privacy. Using our shared computer, I checked our cell phone account online. Linda's phone was currently pinging towers in the downtown area of our own city, not an hour away visiting a friend who lived on the opposite coast. My hands were shaking as I closed the laptop. The betrayal wasn't just the affair, it was the ease with which she'd looked me in the eye and lied, the elaborate fiction she'd constructed without a moment's hesitation. I called her phone from a number she wouldn't recognize, the landline at my workshop. It went straight to voicemail, but not before I heard something that made my blood freeze. The faint sound of a television in the background, playing what sounded like a local news program. The same program that was currently running on our living room TV. She was close. Very close. I grabbed my jacket and walked outside, following some instinct I couldn't name. 3 blocks from our house, on a quiet side street lined with oak trees, I found Linda's car parked behind a silver sedan I recognized from my workshop parking lot. Eric's car. I stood in the shadow of a streetlight, staring at the 2 vehicles, feeling something die inside my chest. It wasn't anger, not yet. It was more like the sensation of falling, that moment when you realize the ground isn't where you thought it was. I didn't approach the cars. I didn't bang on windows or make a scene. I simply stood there for maybe 10 minutes, letting the reality sink in. Then I walked home, poured myself 3 fingers of bourbon, and sat in my workshop until dawn, thinking. By morning I'd made my decision. I wasn't going to confront Linda directly. I wasn't going to beg or plead or demand explanations. I was going to do something else entirely. The plan took weeks to execute, and it required a patience I didn't know I possessed. First, I quietly consulted a divorce attorney and began organizing our financial records. I learned about asset division and alimony, about what evidence would be needed and what wouldn't matter in court. I discovered that Ohio was a no-fault divorce state, which meant the affair itself wouldn't impact the settlement, but it would certainly impact public perception. Next, I began documenting everything. Not in some obsessive, stalker-like way but methodically, carefully. I noted the times Linda claimed to be places she wasn't. I kept track of the new lies as they accumulated. I even, on one occasion, left a small digital recorder in Linda's car, the same kind I used to record notes about furniture projects. It was technically legal since the car was jointly owned, and the recorder captured several phone conversations that left no doubt about the nature of Linda's relationship with Eric. But documentation wasn't my endgame. I had something else in mind. Our 15th wedding anniversary was approaching in November. Typically, we celebrated quietly, dinner at home or maybe a night out at the local Italian restaurant. This year, I suggested something different. What if we threw a party? I asked Linda one evening as she picked at her dinner, distracted by her phone. Nothing huge, just our friends and family. We could do it in the backyard, maybe rent a small tent in case the weather's bad. Linda looked surprised. A party? That's not really us, is it? Maybe it's time we started celebrating what we have, I said, meeting her eyes. 15 years is worth acknowledging, don't you think? I could see her wrestling with the request. Saying no would seem strange and potentially suspicious. But saying yes meant putting on a performance that would be emotionally exhausting for someone carrying the weight of a secret affair. Okay, she said finally. If it's what you want, let's do it. Over the next 3 weeks, I planned meticulously. I sent invitations to everyone we knew, co-workers, neighbors, Linda's colleagues from the library, my clients, both our families. I rented a tent, arranged for catering, even hired a photographer. Linda seemed increasingly nervous as the date approached, but she helped with the preparations, maintaining the facade of an excited wife celebrating her marriage. 3 days before the party, I made one final addition to the plans. I rented a projection screen and a high-quality sound system. When Linda asked about it, I told her I wanted to create a slideshow of our memories together. That sounds lovely, she said, but I caught something flickering in her eyes, a moment of panic quickly suppressed. The day of the party dawned clear and cold, perfect November weather. Linda spent the morning getting ready, choosing her outfit with unusual care. She settled on a deep blue dress I'd bought her for her birthday 2 years earlier. Back when she'd worn it for me, not because it might look good in photos that would commemorate her deception. Guests began arriving at 6. The backyard looked beautiful, strung with warm lights and filled with the sound of laughter and conversation. Linda played her part perfectly, accepting congratulations and well wishes, posing for photos with a smile that looked genuine to everyone except me. At 8 o'clock, I asked for everyone's attention. Linda and I want to thank you all for being here tonight, I began, my arm around my wife's waist. 15 years of marriage has taught us a lot about love, about commitment, about the importance of honesty in a relationship. I felt Linda tense slightly beside me, but her smile never wavered. I thought tonight would be the perfect time to share some memories, I continued. I've put together a little presentation of our life together. Some of you might recognize yourselves in these photos and videos. The projector hummed to life, displaying our wedding photos on the white sheet I'd hung between two trees. Our friends and family gathered closer, drinks in hand, ready to take a trip down memory lane. For the first 10 minutes, it was exactly what they expected. Wedding photos, honeymoon pictures, family gatherings, birthdays, holidays. Linda relaxed beside me, even laughing at some of the older photos where we looked impossibly young. Then the tone shifted. Marriage isn't always easy, I said into the microphone I'd set up. Sometimes you discover things about your partner that surprise you. Sometimes those surprises are wonderful. A photo appeared of Linda at last year's Christmas party, glowing with happiness. And sometimes, I continued, they're not. The screen flickered, and suddenly the crowd was listening to Linda's voice, crystal clear through the sound system. I know this is complicated, Eric, but I've never felt anything like this before. When I'm with you, I remember who I used to be before everything became so routine and predictable. The silence that followed was deafening. Someone dropped a glass, the sound sharp in the sudden quiet. Linda's face went white, then red, then white again. She looked at me with an expression I'd never seen before, shock, horror, and something that might have been relief all mixed together. But I wasn't finished. Marriage is built on trust, I said into the microphone, my voice steady despite the chaos I could feel building around me. When that trust is broken, when someone you love looks you in the eye and lies to you repeatedly, it changes something fundamental about the relationship. Another recording began to play. I hate lying to Mark, but I don't know how to stop now. It's gone too far. Maybe I should just tell him and get it over with. Eric's voice responded, you can't tell him yet. Not until I figure out what to do about Jennifer. We need more time. Jennifer. Eric had mentioned a girlfriend, but apparently Linda wasn't the only one with secrets. The crowd was shifting uncomfortably now, some people starting to edge toward the exit, others frozen in fascination at the drama unfolding. Linda's sister stepped forward, probably trying to figure out how to intervene, but I held up a hand to stop her. I want everyone here to understand something, I said, looking directly at Linda for the first time since the recordings began. I'm not doing this to humiliate Linda. I'm doing this because our marriage was built on a lie, and lies need to come into the light before they can be properly buried. I clicked a remote, and the screen now showed a timeline I'd created, dates, times, locations where Linda had claimed to be versus where she actually was. It was thorough, methodical, undeniable. Linda has been having an affair for approximately 4 months, I announced. She's been lying to me daily during that time, creating elaborate stories to cover her tracks. Tonight was going to be our last night together as husband and wife, though she doesn't know that yet. Linda finally found her voice. Mark, please. I filed for divorce yesterday, I continued, cutting her off. The papers are on the kitchen counter. I've moved my belongings to a storage unit, and I'll be staying at the Hampton Inn until I can find a permanent place. The crowd was thinning rapidly now, people mumbling awkward goodbyes and excuses as they headed for their cars. I didn't blame them. This wasn't exactly the anniversary celebration they'd signed up for. But I had one more revelation to share. Eric, I called out, scanning the remaining guests. I know you're here. I saw your car in the parking lot behind Miller's Hardware this afternoon. A man I didn't immediately recognize stepped forward from behind a group of Linda's co-workers. He was younger than I'd expected, maybe early 30s instead of 40s, with the kind of nervous energy that suggested he'd rather be anywhere else in the world. Actually, I said, consulting my notes, your real name isn't Eric, is it? It's David. David Chin. You work at the insurance company on 5th Street, you're married to a woman named Jennifer, and you have 2 young children. The man, David, looked like he was going to be sick. I hired a private investigator 3 weeks ago, I explained to the remaining crowd, which now consisted mainly of our immediate families and a few close friends too shocked to leave. Turns out Linda isn't your first affair, David. You've been doing this for years apparently. Different women, same lies about being single or divorced. Linda was staring at David with an expression of dawning horror. You told me you were going through a divorce, she whispered. David opened his mouth, closed it, then turned and walked toward the street without saying a word. We heard his car start a moment later, then the sound of tires on gravel as he fled the scene. Linda, I said gently, my anger finally giving way to something closer to pity. You weren't special to him. You were just convenient. Another married woman who wouldn't ask too many questions or make too many demands. She was crying now, ugly sobs that shook her whole body. Her sister finally stepped forward and put an arm around her shoulders, shooting me a look that was equal parts fury and understanding. "I think you've said enough, Mark," Linda's mother said quietly. She'd always liked me, but I could see that was changing in real time. "You're right," I agreed. "I have said enough. Actually, I think I've said everything I needed to say." I turned off the projector and began unplugging equipment while the last few guests gathered their belongings and said their awkward goodbyes. Linda's family formed a protective circle around her, helping her into the house while shooting glances in my direction that ranged from sympathetic to hostile. My own family was more conflicted. My brother pulled me aside as he was leaving. "Jesus, Mark," he said. "That was intense. Are you okay?" "I'm fine," I told him, and surprisingly I meant it. "Actually, I'm better than I've been in months." "But did you have to do it like this? In front of everyone?" I looked at him for a long moment. "She humiliated me every day for months, Jim. Every time she looked me in the eye and lied, every time she came home from being with him and pretended to love me, she was humiliating me. The only difference is that her humiliation was private and mine was public." Jim nodded slowly, understanding dawning in his expression. "When you put it like that. Besides," I added, "this way there's no room for revisionist history. No chance for her to spin this as a misunderstanding or a mistake. Everyone knows exactly what happened and why our marriage is ending." After everyone left, I sat alone in my backyard, surrounded by the detritus of the party, empty glasses, abandoned plates, the projection screen still hanging between the trees like a ghost of the evening's revelations. Linda had gone inside with her family, and I could hear muffled voices through the kitchen window, probably planning her next moves. I felt hollow but peaceful, like a house after a thorough cleaning. All the secrets were out, all the lies exposed to the light. There was nothing left to wonder about or worry over. My phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "This is Jennifer Chen, David's wife. Can we talk?" I stared at the message for a long moment, then typed back, "Tomorrow. The Starbucks on Main Street. 10 a.m. Some stories, I realized, had more chapters than you initially thought. The next morning, I arrived at Starbucks to find a woman about Linda's age sitting in the corner booth, clutching a coffee cup like a lifeline. She had dark circles under her eyes and the shell-shocked expression of someone whose world had been turned upside down in the span of a few hours. "Jennifer?" I asked, and she nodded. "Thank you for meeting with me," she said as I sat down across from her. I needed to talk to someone who would understand. Over the next hour, she told me her story. David had been having affairs for their entire 8-year marriage, always with married women who wouldn't threaten his home life. He developed an elaborate system of lies and cover stories, maintained separate email accounts and phone numbers, even kept a second apartment across town that Jennifer didn't know about. "The worst part," she said, "is that I suspected something was wrong for years, but I kept convincing myself I was being paranoid. He was so good at making me feel crazy for questioning him." I understood that feeling all too well. Jennifer had decided to leave David, but she wanted to warn the other women first. She'd found evidence of at least 3 other ongoing affairs, including Linda's. She'd planned to contact them quietly, but my very public revelation the night before had changed her strategy. "I'm going to expose all of it," she told me. "Every affair, every lie, every woman who doesn't know what she's gotten herself into. David has destroyed my family, but I'm not going to let him keep destroying others." I admired her resolve, but I also felt a deep sadness for her children, who would inevitably become collateral damage in their parents' war. "What will you do now?" she asked me. "Start over, I guess," I said. "Find a new place to live, maybe move the workshop to a different town. I can't stay here, too many memories, too many people who know our business." "That seems like you're punishing yourself for her mistakes." I considered that. Maybe. Or maybe it's just time for a change anyway. I've been doing the same thing in the same place for 15 years. Maybe Linda's betrayal was just the push I needed to try something different. The divorce proceedings were surprisingly civil, mostly because Linda was too ashamed to fight for much beyond her basic necessities. She moved in with her sister temporarily, took a leave of absence from the library, and largely disappeared from public view. I heard through mutual friends that she was seeing a therapist and trying to figure out how to rebuild her life. I sold the house within 6 weeks, a quick sale to a young couple with a baby on the way who saw it as their dream home. I hoped they'd fill it with better memories than Linda and I had managed to create. I moved my workshop to a small town about 2 hours south, A place where no one knew my story and I could be just Mark the furniture restorer instead of Mark the guy whose wife cheated on him in front of half the town. The work was the same, but somehow it felt different. More purposeful, more mine. 6 months after the anniversary party, I received an unexpected visitor at my new workshop. Linda stood in the doorway looking thinner and older, but also somehow clearer than she'd appeared in our final years together. "I'm not here to ask for forgiveness," she said before I could speak. "I know that's not something I can ask for or expect. I just wanted you to know that I understand now what I did to us, to you. And I wanted to thank you." "Thank me?" "For not letting me keep lying. For forcing the truth out into the open. It was horrible and humiliating, but it was also necessary. I'd been living in this fantasy world where I could have both lives, where I could keep you safe from the truth while I figured out what I really wanted. You made me face reality." I studied her face, looking for signs of manipulation or self-pity, but found only exhaustion and something that might have been wisdom. "David wasn't the first affair," she continued. "There was someone else 2 years ago. A brief thing that ended before it really began, but still. I've been lying to you for longer than you know, Mark. I've been lying to myself even longer." This revelation should have hurt, but instead I felt only a distant sadness, like hearing about a tragedy that happened to people you'd never met. "Why?" I asked. "What was missing that you had to look elsewhere?" Linda was quiet for a long time, staring at a half-restored rocking chair in the corner of my workshop. "Nothing was missing," she said finally. "That was the problem. Our life was so complete, so settled, so predictable. I felt like I was disappearing into it. Like I was becoming just your wife, just the librarian, just this quiet person living this quiet life in this quiet town. The affairs weren't about you not being enough, they were about me feeling like I wasn't enough, like I was wasting away into nothing. I understood even though it didn't change anything. The fear of becoming invisible in your own life was something I recognized, something I'd felt myself in those final months when I'd sensed Linda pulling away but hadn't understood why. "I'm moving to Portland," she said. "My cousin has a job opportunity there. I need to be somewhere completely different, somewhere I can figure out who I am when I'm not trying to be someone's wife or live up to someone else's expectations. I hope you find what you're looking for," I told her, and surprisingly I meant it. "I hope we both do," she replied. After she left, I sat in my workshop for a long time, thinking about the strange journey that had brought me to this point. The affair had felt like an ending when I first discovered it, the end of my marriage, the end of the life I'd built, the end of the person I thought I was. But now, 6 months later, it felt more like a beginning. I was 42 years old, single for the first time since college, living in a new town where I could be anyone I chose to be. It was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. That evening, I walked to the local diner for dinner and found myself sitting across from a woman about my age who was eating alone while reading a paperback novel. She had laugh lines around her eyes and paint under her fingernails, and when she caught me looking, she smiled and asked if I knew whether the pie was any good. "I haven't tried it yet," I admitted. "I'm new in town." "Me too," she said. "Just moved here from Chicago. I'm Sarah." "Mark," I replied and felt something shift inside my chest. Not love, not yet, but possibility. Hope. The sense that my story was still being written, that there were chapters ahead I couldn't yet imagine. We talked until the diner closed, about books and art in small towns and the courage it takes to start over. She was a painter who'd left a corporate job to pursue her art full-time. She understood the fear and excitement of rebuilding your life from scratch. I didn't tell her about Linda that first night or the second or even the third. There would be time for that conversation eventually, when we knew each other well enough for painful histories to matter. For now, it was enough to be Mark the furniture restorer, a man with good hands and a quiet voice who was learning how to hope again. Sometimes the strongest response isn't anger or revenge or even forgiveness. Sometimes it's simply the decision to keep living, to keep growing, to keep opening your heart despite the risks. Because silence might leave people alone with their actions, but it also leaves you alone with your choices. And I chose to choose hope. 3 years later, I married Sarah in a simple ceremony in our backyard, with a small group of friends who knew our whole story and celebrated us anyway. Linda sent a card from Portland. She was engaged to a social worker she'd met in group therapy, apparently having found her way to a healthier kind of love. David Chen's wife Jennifer had become something of an advocate for other women dealing with serial cheaters, running a support group and maintaining a blog about rebuilding trust after betrayal. She'd remarried too, to her divorce attorney of all people, and by all accounts was blissfully happy. The furniture restoration business was thriving. I'd hired 2 assistants and was considering opening a second location. But more importantly, I'd learned to see my work as more than just fixing broken things. I was preserving history, maintaining connections between past and present, giving discarded objects new life and purpose. It seemed like a fitting metaphor for my own journey. On quiet evenings, when Sarah was painting in her studio and I was working in the shop, I sometimes thought about that anniversary party and the choice I'd made to expose the truth so publicly. Some people had called it cruel, others had called it brilliant. I'd never been entirely sure which it was. But I knew this. Silence had given me the space to rebuild my life on my own terms, without the weight of anger or the burden of secrets. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply step away from the chaos, speak your truth clearly and completely, and then let the consequences unfold naturally. The truth, I'd learned, doesn't always set you free immediately. But given time and space and the courage to keep moving forward, it does something even better. It gives you the foundation to build something real. Thank you for watching the video to the end. Maybe YouTube will no longer offer you my channel, so subscribe to it by clicking subscribe on the right under the video to receive new interesting stories. Also on the right of the video there is a playlist with other interesting stories that you can listen to, and you can also write in the comments what stories you would like to see on the channel.